This is a production of WTVI PBS Charlotte.
An alleged hazing incident at a local university. Google announces it's coming to Charlotte, and who will actually see video police body cameras record? Those topics and more on Off the Record. Good evening, I'm Jeff Rivenbark. Glad to have you here. This week's guests include Tom Bullock with WFAE, Steve Crump with WBTV News 3, Mark Garrison with WBT Radio, and Glenn Berkins with Q City Metro. Nice to have you all here today. An alleged hazing incident involving a local fraternity. A student at Johnson C. Smith University claims he was hazed by members of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. According to the victim, the alleged incidents took place between last November and mid-January. Now, Steve, I know you've been covering this. The student actually ended up at the hospital, right?
Yeah, after a particular episode where he allegedly was beaten by members of that fraternity, and that in turn resulted in there being two investigations, one by administrators at Johnson C. Smith University and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. There have been 5 people that have been taken into custody. Police were looking for a 6th person. At least 3 of them are students at Johnson C. Smith University.
How often do we think hazing goes on in some of the local universities? I know you guys have covered lots of incidents in recent years. Is this something that is just a rare occurrence? Or?
I think that there are various levels. What the university was very quick to point out, they said, hey, we had no idea that a pledge line was happening from the standpoint of having knowledge that the fraternities a lot of times will let administrators know what's going on in their period of pledging, who the pledgees are. There are other requirements such as grade point averages and things like that. So from what we understand through the administrators at Johnson C. Smith University, it was unsanctioned as well as what's known as an underground pledge line.
So what do we think's happened to that 6th person they're looking for? I mean,
from the release that CMPD had put out, they met with 5 of them who pretty much voluntarily went in on their own. I don't know if they were able to make contact with that other person, but I'm sure through the network of the frat brothers per se, that there's a way of finding him.
Well, another big story this week, tech giant Google plans to bring high-speed internet to Charlotte, but first, the company has to build a whole network of fiber optic cables, and that's expected to take about 2 years to do. A company official saying this week, Google Fiber will put Charlotte, quote, on par with some of the fastest cities in the world, including Tokyo and Seoul. We've often heard that Charlotte is a world-class city. Is this just one way that we're actually taking that spot?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think it's pretty cool. I mean, you're going from speeds comparable to a Model T to a jumbo jet in terms of of your internet service, which is fascinating. The other thing that was there were a number of things interesting at the press conference, but Google took some real publicity hits when they did this in Kansas City for cutting down a bunch of trees. And Ron Carley, I was talking to him, the city manager, and he said, we've already talked to Google about that. They don't cut down trees here in Charlotte, but I think that kind of remains to be seen, how many trees they cut down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Google learned a lot from Kansas City.
Yeah.
Kansas City was the first city where Google put in this new fiber optic network. There were a lot of growing pains, you're absolutely right. But it's very interesting, and it's not the panacea that I think everybody is so excited to see. I mean, what's interesting is they're focusing their efforts inside Charlotte. So it's going to be in the city limits. We do not know if there are or are not plans to expand that to the rest of the county or surrounding areas. It seems possible, but either way, it's going to be quite some time. But
well, when we were all gathered around the woman from Google, I asked her, I said, is this just the city limits? And she said yes, but I think eventually there'll be pressure to expand it out.
Well, and it really matters. What's interesting, though, is does this make sense for Charlotte in terms of luring businesses or possibly creating jobs? And empirically, it looks like the answer is yes. If you look again at Kansas City, it actually helped be a real catalyst to bring in high-tech entrepreneurs, to bring in people who wanted to take part in this, internet service that's pretty common in other parts of the world, but is not common here in the United States. And the cost point looks really good. I mean, you're talking about $70 a month to $120 a month, but it's funny because whether or not it makes sense for individual customers really matters on what you pay now. And the big benefit I think that we're going to see, no matter whether you live inside Charlotte city limits or not, is simply competition. And you've seen that almost immediately. If you go back to when Google said we're thinking about this, AT&T jumps out and says, oh, we're going to bring you better service, better, high-speed internet. Time Warner says, oh, by the way, we were already planning on doing this too. And where are the other cities that they did this? Austin, Texas, which is another Google city. They were talking about rolling out stuff in Raleigh-Durham, which is also going to get Google Fiber. So just having the presence here, whether or not you can directly hook up to Google may in fact be a benefit, because we're seeing more products offered, and that competition I think is actually going to help.
As you pointed out, I think the thing to watch is it going to create the jobs that everyone's talking about? The people I talk to with the city, they are very, very excited about this, and they're almost touting it as a jobs program, that it's going to allow entrepreneurs to create more jobs, and as you hinted, I think that's yet to be seen.
Well, it's an interesting point about that, though. They made a point of saying the other day that it's only going to residential residences first, not to businesses. And I asked Ron Carley about that. I said, well, if you're going to really tout job creation, businesses need the high speed. And he said, well, a lot of people work at home these days, which is true. There's no question
Especially
about
the bank folks, in a banking town.
But I would think that if you really want it to be a big jobs creator, the businesses need to have it.
Well, I think a lot of people work at home, but it's going to take a lot more than high-speed internet connection for those people to create jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
But the funny thing is, there's already, for businesses, a fiber optic network right here in Charlotte that they can buy. I mean, get access to. Packard Place has a gigabyte cable that goes into it. It's actually not that uncommon, but in Kansas City, these little pop-ups that were startups did it from home, so that way they could get access to the service, and they get it at a cheaper rate than the business would pay. So you could still see it, but it's just one of these things that shows you the technology is there, it is in place. So as a consumer, you almost wonder, well, then why, Time Warner, are you not offering this to residential people? Why is it that I have to wait until somebody else that's coming in that has a big splashy name to actually get a better service and potentially a lower price? Either way, though, I think the fact that Google, well, there's two things that's interesting to me. I mean, number one, if you look at the cities that Google said yes to, they're all in the south or southeast. They skipped over San Jose, they skipped over Silicon Valley, and they came to Nashville, Atlanta, Raleigh-Durham, and Charlotte, which is really interesting to me. But if you look at the why, possibly it's a backbone issue, possibly it's the growth. We are one of the fastest growing regions, but they clearly see that this is the area to focus on. Just having that name, whether the service actually does exactly what it's supposed to do or not,
perhaps it's an East
having
Coast,
that name can help.
an East Coast footprint, because everybody thinks Silicon Valley. From the standpoint of what's but even in as much as what's happening in the tech world with Silicon Valley in the last 20 years, do you have that presence on the East Coast? So, when you just kind of geographically look at the map and you got Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte, perhaps that provides a presence, and even what we've seen with Google do already in the state.
I think it's going to shake up Time Warner. I mean, I've always thought their business philosophy was charge the most you can, deliver the least you can. And
stay on hold.
Yes, and talk to Bob in India if you have any customer service issues. So I think it's a wake-up call there for those
And
guys.
certainly competition is good all the way around. Also this week, Charlotte City Council unanimously voting to spend $7 million to buy body cameras for police. Chief of Police Rodney Monroe saying the purchase will help police adapt to increasing demands to record interactions between officers and the public. Local civil rights activists saying this is something we need. Now, according to a WBTV News investigation that actually aired Thursday night, the video won't necessarily be available for us to see, and we've kind of known that all along, right?
It's not that it won't necessarily. It won't be.
Won't be. That's
I
right.
mean, it's a full stop on that, and part of that is actually North Carolina state law. If you think about where the body camera is, and I just actually did a ride-along with the Greensboro Police Department because they've had these for 2 years, and they're kind of being held as a model for what Charlotte wants to do. Everybody agrees it's a great tool, but it's all about how you use it. It's just like anything else. And what's interesting is, because of personnel issues, being able to say this is we use this to evaluate an officer, or we use this to evaluate, trends, certain things can and cannot be released. in terms of criminal investigations, certain things can or cannot be released. And right now, the law simply is not caught up to the point of body cameras. So a lot of these records, they're still trying to figure it out. I mean, the ACLU is working with police departments of the state to try to figure out a best practices. We're at the point where we have it, but we don't know yet how to use it. And it's not, because of that, it's not necessarily the perfect solution that everybody is talking about, because like every other tool, it matters on how it's used. And if you have a high expectation to being able to see these videos, if you're a citizen, had an interaction with an officer that you did not like, and you expect that you can walk into the local precinct and say, show me the tape, they're going to tell you good luck, but no.
Yeah, that's right. You'd have to lawyer up. The other thing is they don't all turn on automatically. So if the officer decides he's going to do something that he shouldn't be doing, he can just, I forgot to turn on the body cam.
But in the ordinance that came before City Council the other night, they said that these cameras automatically turn on when a person hits license sirens and if a taser is fired.
If the taser's fired,
but
right.
Will be. They say that will happen later this year. We don't actually know if Taser's going to make good on that or not.
That's
Right, and then
still,
there's some feature that will give you like 30 seconds before the episode,
Well, and I think another issue too is capacity. I think all of us have worked in newsrooms where we no longer have film or tape. We now have everything on digital files.
Right.
You've also got a plan to store that, and how long are you going to store these digital files? And that's another big issue that I think some other cities across the country are wrestling with: is how far back do we keep this available?
But
the other thing, while the body cam is getting a lot of attention, CMPD is actually doing a lot of things behind the scenes to address community relations, racial sensitivity training. New recruits are going through that kind of thing, and now they're rolling it out to some of the existing officers. Ron Carley spoke on Tuesday to the Tuesday Morning Breakfast Forum, and he talked quite a bit about what some of the things are that CMPD is actually doing behind the scenes to address some of the issues that we've seen in Ferguson or New York or some of the other places that have had problems.
In fact, I mean, think of the civil liberties. They can't call it an ordinance yet. They don't know what it is, but they're trying to better enshrine those civil liberties with city government, and they're trying to figure out the best way to do that. And it comes at an interesting time, and I think you're right. They really seem to be trying to build trust.
Well, and what's funny is you have the ACLU and police unions all on the same page,
How often do you hear that?
Which is rare, which is very, very rare.
That actually surprised me. I was actually surprised that the police unions would favor body cameras. I would think that they would oppose that. But for whatever reason, they do.
Well, I think one of the reasons, too,
protects the officer.
Well, and I think there's two reasons for that, and it's a really good point. I think the first one is you're already dealing in a war of videos. Everybody's got a smartphone these days, it seems, that has video capacity, so it gives the officers their own take. Instead of just seeing one side of the story that may not have been edited, they have their side of the story that at least they can present in a better way, at least from their perspective. But it also seems to calm everybody down. I mean, that's what all the research says. Just the cameras out there right now makes people stop to think a little bit. And the officer that I rode along with yesterday said in particular, and he goes through a pretty high crime area in Greensboro, that just having it there, people start acting a little bit differently because they know that they're being recorded. It's almost like you can't be anonymous anymore because it's on tape.
Well, it's very interesting. That point, though, President Obama's asking Congress for a lot of money to do this nationwide. And I interviewed a couple of Republican congressmen who don't like the idea of the body cams for the very reason that they think police will get less cooperation in high crime neighborhoods because they don't want to be photographed. But that seems like kind of a weak argument.
But it sounds like a visual deterrent is what it comes across as.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the issue of the accountability, because the officer also knows, okay, let me keep my emotions in check. And also the person that they're responding to knows, okay, I better watch what I'm doing because I'm being recorded. So there's accountability on both sides, and I think that's a really good thing. Back to your point, Glenn, with the police officers going out into the community, there's also an effort underway right now in Charlotte to reach out to a lot of barber shops. What do we know about that?
Well, I don't know a lot about that. Steve might be a little better talking about that. But I do know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that CMPD is doing, reaching out to the community in a number of ways. I don't know as much about.
Well, you got
barber
a young
shops.
barber on North Tryon Street who's 35 years old, who has an 18-year-old son who just got a driver's license, who's been watching what's been going on in Ferguson, and he felt compelled to act. And he and some other barbers, black neighborhood barbers, got together, approached the chief where he has his hair cut. And so what the outgrowth of that is there are going to be a series of town meetings
that I will
at
moderate
rec
the
centers.
very first one.
Are you?
I'm moderating the very first one.
I
at
think
the
it's a
Greenville
great
Center
idea.
on Sunday, and there have been a number of meetings with the sheriff's department, with the fire department, with the
They're gonna
Attorney
have lawyers in
Harold,
there.
Harold Cogdell, Judge Lou Trosh is going to be there. So there's this whole thing in terms of it will deal with what to do in a traffic stop, to how do you want to be policed? What are the expectations on the side of law enforcement? What's the expectations on the part of the citizenry?
All right, another big topic this week. On Tuesday, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education announced its decision to appoint Ann Clark to serve as the district superintendent through July 2016. Clark has been a part of CMS for 30-some years. This is just a temporary installment, I guess. I mean, she says she's made it very clear she does not want to be considered for the position, but is she the right person to run CMS right now?
Here's what I'm going to say, and I think, Mark, you can relate to just in terms of collective memory here. Whenever we see a situation with an interim or an acting or kind of a finger in the dike type person, to kind of hold it together, until they move forward, there's always some interesting issues that occur. And the reason why I go through this, I think back to Jim Pewsley, when I believe it was who's the guy, the dental guy, John Murphy.
John Murphy.
Yeah.
He got all that dental work.
Right.
Yeah.
There was some clause in his
taxpayer
contract
dime.
where he got like specified dental work. But the point is, after Murphy left, I believe Pewsley was the guy, and there was this whole period, where of healing and that sort of a thing, where there was kind of the wailing and gnashing of teeth, if you will. And so, no pun intended. But the thing is, Pewsley was the guy, but everyone knew that he was a lame duck. And I kind of think that may be what happens, with Ann Clark. I mean, what will she get done in this time period? And you go back to right after Jay Robinson left in the same time, or Peter Relic, you had a guy by the name of Calvin Wallace. So we've seen these interim situations before, but what kind of fruit do they bear at the end of the day?
I think the other problem, in addition to her being a lame duck, is that out in the community, whether it's right or wrong, there are people who think she helped orchestrate the
Getting
departure
rid of
the previous superintendent. And I think she and the school board, I think that's something that they're going to have to deal with eventually.
Especially since all of her platform seems to be, just literally carrying on
what Heath
Morrison was doing, almost to a point. I mean, I found it really interesting that she gave the whole State of the School speech underneath, what is it, Our Time Is Now. Well,
that was his little slogan, yeah.
But it's like your time is always. If you're a school district, it's not like or if our time is now, then I expect to see something a little bit more of a change. But what I'm stuck with is if you guys are right and she's really treated as a lame duck, well, there are lots of outstanding issues that still need to be addressed. And one of the biggest ones, I think, is this supposed, push to end out of school suspensions. And this was supposed to be announced fall. Then it was like, well, maybe a little bit, maybe in December, and we still haven't heard exactly what the new policy is going to be. And I think it's an important policy. So I'm curious, if she's a lame duck, is she going to push it through? Is she going to do the hard work, or is she just going to leave it for the next
The other
person?
thing is, as it relates to the history of this community, school superintendents have the ones that have been liked have had great people skills outside of the building, and for those of us, in the media, when we tried to get to Ann Clark, getting into Fort Knox is easier some days.
People skills, that's an oxymoron with her, especially in dealing with the media.
Well, and from the standpoint of where you had, like a Pete Gorman, who was kind of like rah with the community. Peter Relic, his first photo ops were holding hands with the kids walking down the halls. It was the same way, with Heath Morrison, where you would see, him being the life of the party. I'm surprised, you had some superintendents that would put the lampshade on their head at a party.
I mean,
we don't see that with
she
her.
can just phone it in, make the big money now, then retire, boom, move on.
I do think it
looks
is
like.
fair, though, to say that I think a lot of people do praise her for the fact that she has risen through the ranks. She was a bus driver. She's worked in the school system. There's been a lot of turbulence in the last several months. So
how does she stabilize it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Good question.
yeah, that's the big question.
And can she?
Right. Another big speech this week, this one coming from Mecklenburg County Commissioner Trevor Fuller, who delivered the State of the County speech. Some good news. Fuller says since tax revenues are up, they won't have to raise property taxes. He also talked about the county's 5.4% unemployment rate, which is the lowest in 5 years. Did anything resonate with you as you were paying attention to any of the coverage on the speech?
Just the push that now that things are improving, that we're seeing more revenue, that I think they're going to be under some pressure to perhaps even cut taxes, but I don't see that actually happening. Nor do I think that would be a good thing to do. I think when the economy's booming and you're getting tax revenue, the last thing you want to do is do something that you're going to have to undo if things go the other direction. And economies are cyclical. We're in a good time right now, but that doesn't mean that in 2 or 3 years from now we're still going to be in a good time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's one of those things, if you plan for the worst when times are the best, you actually have a better chance of making it through both and not having to get creative. And creative can always be a devastating thing when it comes to
And
taxes.
the other danger is that the Democrats don't see this as an opportunity to spend more.
And there was also another push for decentralizing county government. Is that something we need? Is that something that will help serve the people of Mecklenburg County better?
It matters on how it's done. I think it's a laudable idea. You know, you have these centralized bureaucracies that can be a little hard to penetrate for the average person, especially if you can't get around, depending on where they're at. But just moving them around doesn't necessarily make them more accessible. And it can also be a lot more expensive. I think it matters on how it's ambitious, but how do you approach it? Do you just move buildings? And does that really change all that much? Do you open little branches to make sure that everybody, you find it a little bit more accessible? Because, you know, if it's inaccessible because it's in one part of the neighborhood and suddenly you move it to another part of the city, then it's still inaccessible for a large chunk of people. So I'm curious.
But I think
what I want to see what they do.
they're taking a page from what's happened in the city of Charlotte, where you can go to like a local police station, and pay your water bill, or do this or do that, where you can find government functions on the street corners. So the question is, and the fact that Mecklenburg County encompasses such a large area from Lake Norman all the way down to South Carolina, through Pineville, where do you put these places, and what functions will they have?
And that's really effective, too, with people coming in to pay their water bills. The dialogue they have with the police officers, being able to see those folks and hopefully establishing stronger relationships. Another big topic this week, overturned convictions for 9 black men known as Friendship 9. You may recall they went to jail after staging a sit-in at a lunch counter in Rock Hill in 1961. 8 of the men are still living and were in court this week. At one point, prosecutor Kevin Brackett told the men, "So allow me to take this opportunity to extend to each of you my heartfelt apology for what happened to you in 1961. It was wrong." Steve, I know you've covered this extensively. Why did it take 54 years for us to get an overturned conviction on this?
I think the stars had to line up. And the reason why I say that, there had been efforts in the South Carolina legislature. Representative John King from Rock Hill introduced a bill to have their records expunged. It never made it out of committee. There were a number of governors going back some 50 plus years that could have taken action. That didn't happen. And it came to somebody just doing something rather ordinary. There's a book writer by the name of Kimberly Johnson. She wrote a children's book on the Friendship 9, takes it to Kevin Brackett, who says, "Oh, this is a good idea." So those 2 individuals were the catalyst for what we saw the other day, which got a lot of national media attention.
I love what Brackett said, too, because some of the other plans that you talk about, Steve, were to pardon them.
Exactly.
And he said, a pardon is wrong. A pardon still acknowledges that something happened that was wrong, and that, these are the perpetrators who did it, but we're going to forgive them for their bad actions. He said that's the wrong way to go. They don't need to be forgiven. They need to get justice. And I think, overturning the convictions was a much more powerful move. It wasn't just symbolic. It really is saying the state was wrong.
The state was
Right.
Going back
vacated.
But going back to your original question, why did it take so long? We in this nation, we're still dealing with racial issues and unresolved racial issues from the 60s going back to slavery. I'm not really surprised that it's taken that long. It's not an easy subject to deal with, and you have people on both sides who are dug in. They take very entrenched positions.
I mean, you can look at the South Carolina State Capitol, and they're still flying the stars and bars.
Right, exactly. So I'm not really surprised. I'm probably more surprised that it did happen.
The other side, too, which was kind of a rather interesting moment, and that is Attorney Charles Jones, who's from Charlotte. He was part of SNCC. There were 4 other students that were arrested, and I'll go back to this whole concept of jail, no bail. They did 30 days on the chain gang, and there was a person by the name of Diane Nash. A lot of people who credit things that happened in the civil rights movement look to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. The very first letter from jail that talked about the absurdity of being imprisoned for civil rights came out of Rock Hill and Diane Nash, who has a role in the movie Selma. And it was just one of those things of where Nash, Charles Jones, Charles Sherrard, and Ruby Doris Smith, they were the 4 students from SNCC in Atlanta that came in a week later, and they got 30 days as well.
One of the things Reverend Bernice King said, it's a victory for nonviolence and affirms that nonviolence always wins in the end.
The moral arc, as
yes.
her father talked about.
Lots of talk this week about Deflategate, Katy Perry, and the Super Bowl. Real quickly, let's go around the table. Who do you think will win this weekend, New England Patriots or the Seattle Seahawks? Glenn, let's start with you.
I think New England will win, but I'll be cheering for the other team.
All right, Mark?
I agree. The cheating Patriots will win, but I guess I'm pulling for Seattle. Although I don't like either team, so I don't really
That's true.
care.
Panthers are out of it.
I think the winner's going to be the ball boy who has to put on the scales, just to see how many ounces the balls will be.
That's right.
I'm going to say the winner is Marshawn Lynch because he gets to do another press conference where he pokes fun at the fact that athletes never say anything anyway, so why should he get fined?
All right, New England for me. That's all the time we have this week. Thanks to my guests, Tom Bullock with WFAE, Steve Crump with WBTV News 3, Mark Garrison with WBT Radio, and Glenn Berkins with Q City Metro. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Off the Record.
A production of WTVI PBS Charlotte.